Sebastian Cross hadn't smiled in 3 years, 4 months, and 17 days. Not since the day his mother died, leaving him with a technology empire worth $47 billion and a heart that felt like winter. At 31, he commanded boardrooms across 5 continents, owned properties in 12 countries, and could buy anything except the one thing he truly wanted: peace. The Central Park bench had become his sanctuary, a place where nobody recognized the man behind Cross. Dynamics, the company that revolutionized artificial intelligence. Here, surrounded by autumn leaves and the distant laughter of children, he could breathe without the weight of expectations crushing his chest. The oak tree above him had lost most of its leaves, mirroring how Sebastian felt inside, stripped, bare, waiting for something he couldn't name. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, someone else claimed the other end of his bench. She sat quietly, her dark hair catching the last rays of sunlight filtering through the branches. Her clothes were simple: worn jeans, a paint-stained sweater, and boots that had walked many miles. She held a sketchbook in her lap, her fingers moving gracefully across the page, creating something beautiful from nothing. Sebastian found himself watching the gentle curve of her wrist, the way she tilted her head when concentrating, the small smile that played at the corners of her mouth as her drawing took shape. "Beautiful evening," she said without looking up, her voice carrying a slight accent that spoke of sunshine and distant shores. Her words weren't directed at him specifically, just offered to the universe like a gift. Sebastian's throat felt rusty from disuse. When had he last spoken to someone without an agenda, without lawyers and contracts and billion-dollar deals hanging in the balance? "Yes," he managed, the single word carrying more weight than any speech he'd ever given to shareholders. She glanced at him then, and Sebastian felt something shift in his chest. Her eyes were the color of warm honey, filled with a kindness he'd forgotten existed in the world. She didn't recognize him. He was certain of that. There was no calculation in her gaze, no sudden shift in posture that came when people realized they were sitting next to one of the most powerful men in America. She simply saw him as another person sharing a bench in a beautiful park. "I'm Luna," she said, closing her sketchbook and extending a hand that bore traces of charcoal and paint. "Luna Martinez." "Sebastian," he replied, taking her hand in his. Her fingers were warm, calloused from work, real in a way that made his own manicured hands feel artificial. He didn't offer his last name, didn't mention the company or the fortune or the magazine covers. For the first time in years, he was just Sebastian, the language of broken hearts. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dipped lower, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. Luna reopened her sketchbook and Sebastian caught glimpses of her work, faces full of emotion, city scenes that captured the soul of New York, landscapes that spoke of places far from the concrete and steel that surrounded them. "You're very talented," Sebastian said, surprising himself with the compliment. He'd grown so accustomed to speaking only in business terms that genuine praise felt foreign on his tongue. Luna smiled, and Sebastian felt that strange shift in his chest again, like something frozen was beginning to thaw. "Thank you. Art doesn't pay the bills, but it feeds the soul, you know." Sebastian didn't know, actually. He'd built his fortune by feeding machines with data, creating algorithms that could predict human behavior better than humans could themselves. Soul feeding had never been part of the equation. "What kind of bills?" he found himself asking, then immediately regretted the question. It was too personal, too forward. But Luna didn't seem offended. "The usual," she said with a laugh that held no bitterness. "Rent, groceries, art supplies when I can afford them. I work at a coffee shop in the village during the day, paint at night. It's not glamorous, but it's mine." The simplicity of her life struck Sebastian like a physical blow. Here was someone who owned nothing of monetary value, yet seemed to possess everything he lacked: joy, purpose, peace. When had he last felt any of those things? Before his mother's death, certainly. Before the company went public and his father's. Expectations became a weight he could never lift. Before he realized that being the heir to a technology empire meant sacrificing every piece of himself that wasn't useful to the bottom line. "What about you?" Luna asked, turning to face him fully. "What brings you to this bench on a Tuesday evening?" Sebastian hesitated. How could he explain that he came here because it was the only place in the city where he could disappear? That, despite owning a penthouse worth $50 million, he felt most at home on this weather-beaten bench surrounded by strangers who didn't want anything from him. "I like the quiet," he said finally, which was true if incomplete. Luna nodded, as if she understood perfectly. "The city can be overwhelming sometimes. I come from a small town in New Mexico, and when I first moved here, I thought the noise would drive me crazy. But this place," she gestured around them, "it has its own kind of peace." "Where in New Mexico?" Sebastian asked, genuinely curious. He owned properties around the world, but had never spent time in the Southwest, had never taken the time to explore America beyond the business centers and conference rooms. "A tiny place called Esperanza. You've probably never heard of it." Luna's eyes grew distant, and Sebastian saw homesickness flicker across her features. "Population 800 on a good day. My grandmother still lives there in the same house, where my mother grew up. She raises chickens and tends a garden that produces the best tomatoes in 3 counties. The love in Luna's voice when she spoke of her grandmother was something Sebastian hadn't heard in years. His own family interactions were boardroom meetings disguised as dinner conversations, strategic alliances masquerading as relationships. "You miss it," he observed. "Every day," Luna admitted. "But dreams don't grow in small towns, at least not. The kind I have. I want to show my art in galleries, maybe teach someday, help kids discover that they can create beauty even when the world feels ugly." Sebastian found himself leaning forward, drawn in by her passion. When had he last felt passionate about anything? His company's mission statement spoke of improving lives through technology, but somewhere along the way, the mission had become secondary to the profits. "That's a beautiful dream," he said. "What about your dreams?" Luna asked, her honey-colored eyes fixed on his face with an intensity that made him want to look away and lean closer at the same time. Dreams. Sebastian almost laughed at the concept. He hadn't allowed himself to dream in so long that he'd forgotten what it felt like. "I'm not sure I have any anymore," he said, the honesty surprising him. Luna studied his face for a long moment, and Sebastian felt as if she were seeing straight through to the hollow place where his heart used to be. "Everyone has dreams," she said softly. "Sometimes we just forget how to listen for them." The art of connection. A cool breeze rustled through the remaining leaves, and Luna shivered slightly. Without thinking, Sebastian shrugged out of his jacket a wool blend that cost more than most people's monthly salary and offered it to her. "I couldn't," Luna protested, but Sebastian was already draping it around her shoulders. "Please," he said, and something in his voice must have conveyed how much he needed to do this small kindness, because Luna settled the jacket around herself with a grateful smile. "Thank you," she said, and Sebastian felt a warmth spread through his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. "That's very kind." Kind. When had anyone called him kind? Ruthless, brilliant, powerful. These were the adjectives that followed his name in business journals. But kind. That word belonged to a version of himself he'd thought was lost forever. They talked as the park grew darker around them, their conversation flowing like water finding its natural course. Luna told him about her art, about the way colors could convey emotions that words couldn't capture. She spoke of her grandmother's stories, of growing up in a place where everyone knew your name and your business, where community meant something deeper than networking events and profit margins. Sebastian found himself sharing things he'd never told anyone. About how his mother used to read to him every night, creating voices for each character that made the stories come alive. How she'd encouraged his curiosity about how things worked, never imagining that her gentle boy would grow up to build machines that could think. How her death had felt like someone had turned off all the lights in his world, leaving him to navigate by the cold glow of computer screens and quarterly reports. "She sounds wonderful," Luna said when he finished, her voice thick with emotion. I lost my mother when I was 15. Cancer. It changes you, doesn't it? Makes you realize how fragile everything really is. Sebastian nodded, feeling understood in a way he hadn't experienced since his mother's funeral. I'm sorry for your loss, he said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. Thank you. I'm sorry for yours, too. Luna reached out and touched, his hand briefly, a gesture so simple and genuine that Sebastian felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crack. They sat in comfortable silence again, but this time the quiet felt shared rather than solitary. Sebastian realized that for the first time in years, he wasn't thinking about the company, about his father's expectations, about the weight of responsibility that pressed down on him every waking moment. He was simply present, in this moment, with this extraordinary woman who had appeared in his life like grace he hadn't known he needed. I should probably head home, Luna said eventually, reluctantly. Early shift tomorrow. Sebastian felt panic, flutter in his chest. He wasn't ready for this to end, wasn't ready to return to his empty penthouse and the cold comfort of his success. Would you like to get coffee sometime? He asked, then immediately felt foolish. Coffee, as if something as simple as coffee could bridge the gap between their worlds. But Luna smiled, and Sebastian felt that ice in his chest crack a little more. I'd like that, she said. There's a little place in the village where I work. Aurora Coffee. Do you know it? Sebastian didn't, but he would find it. He would have moved mountains to find it. What time do you get off work? 6 tomorrow evening, if you're free. Free? Sebastian almost laughed. He had a board meeting. At 5, a conference call with investors at 7, and 17 other commitments that his assistant had carefully orchestrated to maximize his productivity. But looking at Luna, seeing the hope in her eyes, he realized that none of those things mattered as much as being wherever she was. I'll be there, he said, and meant it more than any promise he'd ever made. Luna stood, reluctantly shrugging out of his jacket and handing it back to him. Her fingers brushed his as he took it, and Sebastian felt electricity shoot up his arm. Thank you for this evening, Sebastian. I haven't talked like this with anyone in, well, a long time. Neither have I, Sebastian admitted, standing as, well. He towered over her small frame, but somehow she made him feel less imposing, more human. Thank you for letting me share your bench. Luna laughed, a sound like silver bells in the evening air. Our bench, she corrected, and Sebastian felt something shift permanently in his world. As she walked away, her figure disappearing into the gathering darkness, Sebastian remained standing by the bench, his jacket still warm with her presence. For the first time in 3 years, 4 months and 17 days, Sebastian Cross smiled. It was a small smile, tentative and rusty from disuse, but it was real. Tomorrow, he would find Aurora Coffee. Tomorrow, he would see Luna again. And maybe, just maybe, he would begin to remember what it felt like to dream. Aurora Coffee sat tucked between a vintage bookstore and a flower shop on a narrow street in Greenwich Village, the kind of place that tourists walked past without noticing, but locals treasured like a secret. The morning sun streamed through windows that hadn't been cleaned in weeks, casting golden rectangles across mismatched tables and chairs that looked like they'd been collected from garage sales across the city. Sebastian stood across the street at exactly 5:45 p.m., watching through the windows as Luna moved behind the counter with practiced grace. She wore a simple black apron over her jeans and sweater, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun that somehow looked effortlessly beautiful. He'd spent the entire day thinking about her, much to his assistant Patricia's confusion when he'd canceled 3 meetings and left the office 2 hours early. Mr. Cross, you have the Henderson call at 7, Patricia had reminded him as he gathered his coat. Reschedule it, Sebastian had said, not offering an explanation. How could he explain that for the first time in years, something mattered more than business? Now, watching Luna laugh with a customer as she handed over a steaming cup, Sebastian felt nervous in a way that billion-dollar deals had never made him. What if she'd changed her mind? What if the magic of last night had been nothing, more than twilight and shared loneliness? The bell above the door chimed as he entered, and Luna looked up from the espresso machine. Her face lit up with genuine pleasure, and Sebastian felt that now familiar warmth spread through his chest. "Sebastian!" she called out, finishing the drink she was making before walking around the counter to greet him. "You came." "I said I would," he replied, suddenly aware of how overdressed he was in his $1,000 suit, surrounded by students in torn jeans and artists in paint-splattered clothes. Luna seemed to notice his discomfort. "Come on," she said, touching his arm gently. "Let me introduce you to Roberto. He owns this place." Roberto turned out to be a man in his 60s with kind eyes and hands stained permanently dark from years of handling coffee beans. He looked Sebastian up and down with the shrewd gaze of someone who'd seen every type of person the city had to offer. "So you're the man who's got our Luna glowing like sunshine," Roberto said with a thick accent that spoke of islands and warm beaches. "She's been humming all day. Haven't heard her hum since she started working here 6 months ago." Sebastian felt heat rise in his cheeks. "I don't know about that." "Roberto, stop embarrassing him," Luna said, but she was smiling as she said it. "What can I get you to drink?" Sebastian realized he'd never actually ordered coffee for himself. His assistant brought him espresso in meetings. His housekeeper left a pot brewing in his penthouse, but he'd never stood in a coffee shop and chosen what he wanted to drink. "What do you recommend?" "Trust me?" Luna asked, her honey-colored eyes twinkling with mischief. "Completely," Sebastian said, and meant it in ways that had nothing to do with coffee. The taste of something real. 10 minutes later, they sat at a corner. Table near the window, Sebastian's hands wrapped around a ceramic mug that was chipped on one side. The coffee was unlike anything he'd ever tasted, rich and complex with hints of chocolate and cinnamon, warm in a way that seemed to spread from his stomach to his fingertips. "This is incredible," he said, taking another sip. "Roberto roasts his own beans, gets them from a farm in Guatemala where his cousin works." Luna cradled her own mug, steam rising between them like incense. "Everything here has a story." Sebastian looked around the coffee shop with new eyes, noticing details he'd missed before. The mismatched chairs weren't random. Each one was carefully chosen and restored. The art on the walls wasn't mass-produced prints, but original pieces, by local artists, small price tags tucked discreetly in the corners. The whole place hummed with authenticity in a way that made Sebastian's sterile office feel like a mausoleum. "Tell me about your art," Sebastian said, genuinely curious. "What do you paint?" Luna's face became animated as she spoke, her hands moving expressively as she described her work. She painted people, she explained, but not just their faces. She tried to capture their stories, their dreams, the weight they carried in their shoulders, or the hope that lived in their eyes. "I have a series I'm working on called Invisible," she said, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "It's portraits of people society overlooks. The homeless man who sits outside the subway station and writes poetry on cardboard signs. The cleaning lady at the gallery who knows more about art than most of the curators. The immigrant grandmother who sells tamales on the corner and sends every penny back to her family in El Salvador." Sebastian felt something twist in his chest. When had he last really seen people like that? His world was populated by executives and shareholders, people whose worth was measured in stock options and quarterly bonuses. "That sounds powerful," he said. "Art should disturb the comfortable and comfort the disturbed," Luna quoted. "I don't know who said that first, but it's become my motto." They talked until the coffee shop began to empty around them, other customers heading home to dinner and evening plans. Sebastian found himself telling Luna about his work, but not the way he usually described it in interviews or board meetings. Instead, he talked about the early days when he'd genuinely believed technology could solve the world's problems, when he'd stayed up all night coding not for profit but for the pure joy of creation. "What changed?" Luna asked gently when he paused. "Sebastian, was quiet for a long moment, staring into his empty mug. "My mother got sick," he said finally. "Cancer, like yours. But we had access to the best doctors, the most advanced treatments, experimental therapies that most people couldn't afford. None of it mattered. She died anyway, and I realized that all the money and technology in the world couldn't save the people you love." Luna reached across the table and covered his hand with hers. "So you stopped believing in your work?" "I stopped believing in anything," Sebastian admitted. "The company kept growing, kept making money, but it felt hollow, like I was building monuments to nothing." "Maybe," Luna said softly, "you just lost sight of why you started building in the first place." The father's shadow Sebastian's phone rang as they were leaving the coffee shop, Luna's shift finally over. The harsh electronic sound cut through the evening air like a blade, and Sebastian felt his entire body tense when he saw the caller ID. Victor Cross. "I should take this," he said apologetically, stepping away from Luna. Sebastian. His father's voice carried the familiar edge of disappointment that had been Sebastian's soundtrack since childhood. "Patricia tells me you left early today, canceled the Henderson meeting." "I rescheduled it," Sebastian corrected, watching Luna pretend to examine the flowers in the shop window while giving him privacy. "For what possible reason? Henderson Industries represents a $2 billion acquisition." Sebastian looked at Luna, at the way the sunset light caught in her hair, at the patient smile she wore while waiting for him. "Personal reasons," he said. The silence on the other end of the line stretched long enough that Sebastian wondered if the call had dropped. When Victor spoke again, his voice was arctic. "Personal reasons don't build empires, son. Your mother understood that. She never let personal feelings interfere with business." The mention of his mother hit Sebastian like a physical blow. "Don't," he said, his voice warning. "Tomorrow morning, my office, 8 sharp. We need to discuss your priorities." The line went dead. Sebastian stared at his phone for a moment, feeling the familiar weight of expectation settle on his shoulders like lead. When he turned back to Luna, she was watching him with concern. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Family business," Sebastian said, trying to keep his voice light. "Nothing that can't wait." But Luna studied his face with those artist's eyes that saw too much. "You look like someone just walked over your grave," Sebastian managed a weak smile. "Just my father. He has a way of making every conversation feel like a performance review." "Ah," Luna said, understanding flickering in her expression. "One of those fathers." "What about your father?" Sebastian asked, grateful for the change of subject. Luna's expression grew sad. "He died when I was 12. Heart attack. He was a good man, though. Worked construction, came home every night covered in dust and grinning like he'd won the lottery just because he got to see my mother and me. I think he would have liked you." "What makes you say that?" "You have kind eyes," Luna said simply. "He always said you could tell everything about a person by looking at their eyes, kind heart." Sebastian felt something crack open in his chest. When had anyone looked at him and seen kindness? "I'm not sure your father would be right about me." "I think he would be," Luna said, stepping closer to him on the sidewalk. "I think there's a lot more kindness in you than you let yourself believe." The gallery of broken dreams. They walked slowly through the village, neither wanting the evening to end. Luna pointed out her favorite spots: the corner where she'd had her first busking experience, the bookstore where she'd discovered her favorite poet, the tiny gallery where she dreamed of showing her work someday. "What's stopping you?" Sebastian asked as they stood outside the gallery, looking at the current exhibition through the windows. "Money, mainly," Luna said with a self-deprecating laugh. "Gallery fees, framing costs, promotional materials. It's expensive to be poor, you know?" Sebastian knew he could solve that problem with a single phone call, could buy the entire gallery if he wanted to. But something in Luna's voice told him that offering money would be exactly the wrong thing to do. She had pride, dignity, a determination to make her own way that he found both frustrating and deeply attractive. "Have you tried smaller venues?" he asked instead. "Coffee shops? Community centers?" "Some," Luna said. "Roberto lets me hang a few pieces here and there, but it's not the same as a real show. I want people to see the work properly, to experience it the way it's meant to be experienced." They stood in comfortable silence, watching people move past the gallery windows, some stopping to look at the art, others hurrying by without a glance. Sebastian found himself studying Luna's reflection in the glass, the way she looked at the paintings with hunger and longing and fierce determination. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said suddenly, wanting to see that warmth return to her eyes. Luna's entire demeanor changed, softening like wax near a flame. "Abuela Elena. She's 83 and tougher than leather. Still gets up before dawn to tend her garden, still makes tortillas by hand every morning. She raised me after my parents died, taught me that love is something you do, not something you say." "She sounds remarkable." "She is. She always said I was too big for Esperanza, that I needed to come to the city to find my wings. But she also said—" Luna trailed off, looking embarrassed. "What did she say?" "She said I'd know I'd found home, when I met someone who made me want to be brave instead of just seem brave." Sebastian felt his breath catch. "And have you found that person?" Luna turned to look at him directly, her honey-colored eyes serious and searching. "I think I might have." The penthouse prison against his better judgment, Sebastian found himself inviting Luna back to his penthouse. He'd told himself it was just for coffee, just to continue their conversation, but as they rode the elevator to the top floor of one of Manhattan's most exclusive buildings, he wondered what she would think of his world. The elevator opened directly into his living space, a testament to minimalist design and unlimited resources. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of the city that people paid hundreds of dollars just to glimpse from observation decks. The furniture was sleek and expensive, chosen by a decorator who'd never met Sebastian, but had been paid handsomely to create a space that photographed well for magazine spreads. Luna stepped into the apartment slowly, her eyes wide as she took in the view. "Sebastian," she breathed, "this is incredible." But Sebastian, seeing his home through her eyes, felt only emptiness. "It's cold, isn't it?" he said. "Like a hotel room for someone who never checks out." Luna walked to the windows, pressing her palm against the glass. The city spread out below them like a circuit board, millions of lights creating patterns of connection and isolation. "It's beautiful," she said, "but it doesn't feel like you." "What do you mean?" Luna turned back to him, studying his face in the reflection of the city lights. "It's too perfect, too controlled. Where are the books you love? The photographs that make you smile? The mistakes that prove someone actually lives here?" Sebastian looked around his own home and realized she was right. There was nothing personal in the space, nothing that spoke to who he was rather than what he owned. The walls were decorated with expensive art, chosen for investment value rather than emotional resonance. The shelves held awards and business books rather than stories that had shaped his heart. "I haven't thought about what I actually like in a long time," he admitted. Luna walked over to the one personal item in the room, a framed photograph on the side table near the couch. It showed a younger Sebastian with a woman who had his eyes and a smile that could light up rooms. They were sitting in what looked like a garden, dirt under their fingernails, laughing at something off camera. "Your mother?" Luna asked gently. "The last picture we took together," Sebastian said, his voice rough with memory. "She was teaching me to garden, said I needed to know how to make things grow, not just how to build them. She was beautiful. You have her smile." "I don't smile anymore." "You smiled last night," Luna reminded him. "On the bench." Sebastian looked at her, this woman who had appeared in his life like unexpected spring after a brutal winter. "You make me want to remember how." Luna stepped closer to him, close enough that he could smell the faint scent of paint and coffee that seemed to cling to her skin. "Then remember," she said softly. Sebastian felt pulled toward her like gravity, like coming home to a place he'd never been. He raised his hand to touch her face, his thumb tracing the line of her cheek. "Luna," he said, her name a prayer on his lips. "Yes? I think I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and terrifying and absolutely true. Luna's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling, that radiant expression that made Sebastian feel like he could conquer worlds or give up everything, whichever she preferred. "I think I'm falling in love with you too," she whispered. When Sebastian kissed her, it felt like remembering how to breathe after drowning for years. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting of coffee and possibility. She kissed him back with a passion that made his knees weak, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him closer until there was no space left between them. When they finally broke, apart, both breathing hard, Sebastian rested his forehead against hers. "Stay," he said, the word carrying the weight of every lonely night he'd spent in this beautiful empty apartment. "Tonight?" Luna asked. "Forever," Sebastian said, and meant it. Sebastian woke before dawn, something he'd done every day for the past 15 years, his internal clock programmed by decades of early meetings and international calls. But this morning was different. This morning, Luna was curled against his side, her dark hair spread across his chest, her breathing soft and even in sleep. He lay still, afraid to move and wake her, afraid to break the spell of contentment that had settled over him like a warm blanket. In the gray pre-dawn light filtering through his windows, Luna looked like something from a dream, too beautiful, too perfect to be real. His phone buzzed on the nightstand, displaying a text from his father. "Conference room. 1 hour. Don't be late." The cold reality of his life crashed back over Sebastian like ice water. He had responsibilities, obligations, a company to run, and a father whose approval he'd been chasing his entire life. But looking down at Luna, feeling the weight of her trust as she slept in his arms, those obligations felt less important than they had in years. Luna stirred, her honey-colored eyes fluttering open. When she saw Sebastian watching her, she smiled, a sleepy, satisfied expression that made his heart race. "Good morning," she murmured, her voice husky from sleep. "Good morning," Sebastian replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in months," Luna said, stretching like a cat before settling back against his chest. "Your bed is ridiculously comfortable." "Everything I own is ridiculously expensive," Sebastian said, then immediately regretted the words. They sounded cold, calculating, like something his father would say. But Luna just laughed. "That's not the same thing as comfortable. I've slept on $1,000 hotel mattresses that felt like sleeping on marble. This feels like home. Home." The word hit Sebastian with unexpected force. When had his penthouse last felt like home? When had anywhere? His phone buzzed again, more insistently this time. Sebastian knew he should check it, knew his father would be growing impatient, but he couldn't bring himself to move. "Not yet." "You should probably get that," Luna said, noticing his conflict. "Probably," Sebastian agreed, but made no move toward the phone. Luna propped herself up on her elbow, studying his face. "It's your father again, isn't it?" Sebastian nodded, surprised by how easily she could read him. "He's not going to approve of you," he said, the words heavy with regret. "Because I'm poor?" Luna asked, her voice carefully neutral. "Because you make me happy," Sebastian said. "My father believes happiness is a distraction from success." Luna was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing patterns on his chest. "What do you believe?" Sebastian thought about the question. Really thought about it. A week ago, he would have agreed with his father without hesitation. Success was measurable, quantifiable, safe. Happiness was ephemeral, dangerous, a luxury he couldn't afford. But lying here with Luna, feeling more alive than he had in years, Sebastian realized his father might be wrong about a lot of things. "I'm starting to think," Sebastian said carefully, that success without happiness is just expensive misery. The Family Inquisition. The Cross Industries building rose 47 stories above Manhattan, its glass and steel facade reflecting the morning sun like armor. Sebastian had designed it. Himself had wanted it to be a monument to human achievement and technological progress. Now, walking through the lobby with Luna beside him, he saw it through her eyes. Cold, imposing, more like a fortress than a place where dreams were built. He'd asked Luna to come with him to meet his father, partly because he wanted Victor to see what genuine happiness looked like, and partly because he was terrified of facing his father's judgment alone. Luna had agreed, though Sebastian could see the nervousness in the set of her shoulders, the way she smoothed her simple dress for the dozenth time. "He's going to hate me," she said as they rode the elevator to the executive floor. "He's going to try to," Sebastian corrected, "but that says more about him than about you." The executive floor of Cross Industries was a temple to corporate power, all marble floors and mahogany panels and original art that cost more than most people's houses. Sebastian's assistant, Patricia, jumped up from her desk when she saw them, approaching. "Mr. Cross, your father is waiting," she said, her eyes flickering curiously to Luna. "Should I bring coffee?" "Please," Sebastian said, then turned to Luna. "Last chance to run." Luna squared her shoulders and took his hand. "I'm not going anywhere." Victor Cross stood with his back to the door when they entered his office, his imposing figure silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a commanding view of the city. At 68, he was still a formidable presence, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, with the kind of authority that made board members squirm and competitors retreat. He turned when he heard them enter, his pale blue eyes taking in every detail of Luna's appearance in a single, dismissive glance. Sebastian felt anger flare in his chest at his father's obvious disdain. "So this is what's been distracting you from your responsibilities," Victor said, his voice carrying the chill of a New England winter. "Father, I'd like you to meet Luna Martinez," Sebastian said, his voice carefully controlled. "Luna, this is my father, Victor Cross." Luna stepped forward, extending her hand with more courage than Sebastian thought he could have mustered. "Mr. Cross, it's a pleasure to meet you." Victor looked at her outstretched hand for a long moment before shaking it briefly. "Ms. Martinez, tell me, what exactly do you do?" "I'm an artist," Luna said, lifting her chin proudly. "I paint portraits." "How quaint," Victor said, the word dripping with condescension. "And I suppose you make a living from this painting?" Sebastian felt his jaw clench, but Luna remained calm. "I work at a coffee shop to pay the bills while I build my art career. There's no shame in honest work, Mr. Cross." "Of course not," Victor said smoothly. "Though I imagine it must be quite a change, suddenly having access to my son's resources." The implication hung in the air like poison. Sebastian stepped forward, his voice dangerous. "Father, it's okay," Luna said quietly, placing a restraining hand on Sebastian's arm. She looked directly at Victor, her honey-colored eyes steady and unafraid. "Mr. Cross, I understand your concern for your son. Any parent would want to protect their child from people who might use them. But I'm not interested in Sebastian's money. I'm interested in Sebastian." Victor's laugh was sharp and humorless. "My dear girl, do you have any idea what you're saying? Sebastian is worth $47 billion. He will inherit one of the largest technology companies in the world. Are you telling me that doesn't factor into your feelings for him?" "I didn't know who he was when I met him," Luna said simply. "I thought he was just a lonely man on a park bench who looked like he needed a friend." "How wonderfully romantic," Victor said, his tone making the words sound like an insult. "But romance doesn't run corporations, Ms. Martinez. Sebastian has responsibilities that extend far beyond his personal happiness." "Maybe," Luna said, "but what good is running a corporation if you lose yourself in the process?" The room fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic 47 floors below. Victor stared at Luna with something that might have been surprise, as if he hadn't expected her to fight back. "Sebastian, Victor said finally, not taking his eyes off Luna. "I'd like to speak with you privately." "No," Sebastian said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Whatever you have to say, you can say in front of Luna." Victor's eyes narrowed. "This is not a negotiation, son." "You're right," Sebastian said, feeling something shift inside him, like tectonic plates finally settling after years of pressure. "It's not. Luna stays, or we both leave." For a moment, father and son stared at each other across the mahogany expanse of Victor's desk, two opposing forces finally coming to a head. Then Victor smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made Sebastian's blood run cold. "Very well," Victor said. "Ms. Martinez, do you love my son?" "Yes," Luna said without hesitation. "And you, Sebastian, do you love her?" "More than I thought possible," Sebastian replied. "How touching," Victor said. "Then you won't mind a little test." The impossible choice Victor pressed a button on his desk phone, and Patricia's voice filled the room through the intercom. "Mr. Cross? Patricia, please send in the contracts we discussed." Sebastian felt dread settle in his stomach like lead. His father didn't make idle threats, and he never played games he couldn't win. When Patricia entered with a manila folder, Sebastian knew whatever was inside would change everything. "Ms. Martinez," Victor said, opening the folder and sliding papers across the desk toward Luna. "This is a check for $10 million. Luna stared at the check without touching it, her face pale but composed. "I don't understand." "It's quite simple," Victor continued. "That money is yours if you walk away from my son right now. Never see him again, never contact him, disappear from his life completely." Sebastian felt the air leave his lungs in a rush. "You bastard," he said, starting toward his father's desk. "Sebastian, don't," Luna said quietly, still staring at the check. "Let him finish." Victor smiled that cold smile again. "There's more. The second contract is for you, Sebastian. Sign it, and you resign from Cross Industries immediately. Give up your shares, your inheritance, your position. Walk away from everything your mother and I built, everything you've worked for your entire life." "You can't be serious," Sebastian breathed. "Oh, but I am," Victor said. "You see, this is what love really costs. Ms. Martinez can have more money than she's ever dreamed of, but only if she gives you up. Or you can have her, but only if you give up everything else. Choose wisely." Sebastian looked at Luna, seeing the pain and conflict written across her beautiful features. She was staring at the check like it might burst into flames, her hands trembling slightly. $10 million, she said softly. "That's more money than my entire town sees in a year." "Luna," Sebastian said, his voice breaking. "Don't listen to him." "Think about it, Ms. Martinez," Victor continued relentlessly. "What could you do with that money? You could fund art programs for underprivileged children. You could take care of your grandmother for the rest of her life. You could make a real difference in the world." Sebastian watched Luna's face, saw the moment when Victor's words hit their mark. She was thinking about her grandmother, about the coffee shop where she worked to pay rent on a cramped apartment, about the dreams she'd put on hold because survival came first. "And if I take the money," Luna asked, her voice barely above a whisper, "what happens to Sebastian?" "He inherits everything as planned," Victor said. "Marries someone appropriate, has children who will carry on the family legacy. He'll be fine. Will he be happy?" Victor's expression hardened. "Happiness is a luxury we can't afford." Luna stood slowly, walking around the desk to where Sebastian stood, frozen in horror and disbelief. She reached up to touch his face, her thumb tracing the line of his cheek. "I love you," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "I love you too," Sebastian whispered, afraid of what was coming next. Luna turned back to Victor, her shoulders straight and her voice steady. "Mr. Cross, you're asking me to choose between the man I love and the ability to help people I care about." "Life is about choices, Ms. Martinez. The sooner you learn that, the better." Luna nodded, then reached for the check. Sebastian felt his heart stop as she picked it up, holding it like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Then, slowly and deliberately, Luna tore the check in half. "My grandmother taught me something when I was little," she said, letting the pieces fall to the floor. "She said that some things are worth more than money. Love is one of them. Dignity is another." Victor's face went white with rage. "You little fool. Do you have any idea what you've just given up?" "Yes," Luna said calmly. "I've given up the chance to be bought." Sebastian felt something sore in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since childhood. Pride, joy, and love all mixed, together in a cocktail of pure emotion. He stepped forward and took Luna's hand, facing his father together. "And I," Sebastian said, reaching for the second contract, "choose love over everything else." Before Victor could stop him, Sebastian signed his name with bold, decisive strokes. "I resign from Cross Industries. Effective immediately. You ungrateful?" Victor started, but Sebastian cut him off. "No, father. I'm finally grateful for the right things." The road to Esperanza. 3 weeks later, Sebastian found himself in a rented car driving through the New Mexico desert, Luna beside him with her feet on the dashboard and her hair whipping in the wind from the open windows. The landscape stretched endlessly in all directions, red rocks and blue sky and a horizon that seemed to promise infinite possibilities. "Tell me again why we're driving instead of flying," Sebastian said, though he was smiling as he said it. "Because you've never done a road trip," Luna replied, reaching over to squeeze his hand. "And because my grandmother doesn't trust planes. She says if God had wanted people to fly, He would have given them wings instead of legs." They'd been driving for 2 days, stopping at roadside diners and sleeping in motels with neon signs and thin walls. Sebastian had discovered that he loved the anonymity of small towns. The way people looked at him and saw just another traveler instead of a former billionaire who'd given up everything for love. The media had covered his resignation from Cross Industries with typical sensationalism, spinning stories about family feuds and mysterious women and the fall of a business empire. Sebastian had ignored all of it, too busy learning how to be happy to care what strangers thought about his choices. He'd used some of his personal savings to buy a small gallery space in the village, somewhere Luna could display her work properly. She'd protested at first, worried about accepting his help, but Sebastian had convinced her that it wasn't charity. It was investment in something that mattered. "Turn here," Luna said, pointing to a dirt road that looked like it led to nowhere. "This is it." Esperanza appeared gradually, emerging from the desert like a mirage made real. It was exactly as Luna had described it. Small houses with red tile roofs, gardens bursting with vegetables and flowers, children playing in dusty yards while their parents watched from shaded porches. Luna's grandmother lived in a house at the end of the main street, a modest adobe structure with walls the color of sunset and a garden that defied the harsh desert climate. As their car pulled up, an elderly woman emerged from the house, moving with the careful dignity of someone who had lived long and learned much. Elena Martinez was tiny but formidable, with silver hair braided down her back and eyes that missed nothing. She hugged Luna fiercely, speaking rapid Spanish that made her granddaughter laugh and cry at the same time. Then she turned to Sebastian, studying him with the same artist's eye that Luna possessed. "So you're the man who stole my granddaughter's heart," she said in accented but perfect English. "I think it was the other way around," Sebastian replied, and Elena smiled. "Good answer. Come, let me feed you. You're too skinny, and Luna looks happier than I've seen her since she was a little girl." The garden where hearts grow. That evening, after a dinner of homemade tamales and stories that stretched long into the night, Sebastian found himself alone with Elena in her garden. The old woman moved between her plants with practiced ease, checking on tomatoes and peppers that grew impossibly lush in the desert soil. "She told me what you gave up for her," Elena said without preamble, her hands gentle on a vine heavy with fruit. "I didn't give up anything that mattered," Sebastian replied. "Meaning it?" Elena looked at him sharply. $47 billion doesn't matter? Not compared to Luna. The old woman nodded slowly. My husband was like you, believed that love was worth any sacrifice. He gave up a chance to go to college, to move to the city, to make something of himself. Stayed here with me instead. Sebastian felt a chill of doubt. Do you think he regretted it? Elena's laugh was warm and rich. Regretted it? Mijo? He lived the happiest life of any man I ever knew. Worked with his hands, raised his children, loved his wife. When he died, he told me he wouldn't change a single day. She handed Sebastian a tomato, warm from the sun and perfect in its simplicity. Money is like water, she said. Necessary for life, but more than you can drink just runs away. Love, though, love is like good soil. The more you give, the more grows back. Sebastian bit into the tomato, tasting sunshine and rain and the kind of satisfaction that came from things grown with care and time. Luna wants to start an art program for children, he said. Teach them that they can create beauty even when the world feels ugly, and you want to help her. I want to help her change the world, one child at a time. Elena smiled, and Sebastian saw where Luna got her radiance. Then you understand what love really is. What's that? Not just wanting to make someone happy, Elena said, but wanting to help them become who they're meant to be.